Hey there, this is Natalie, and now we've finally seen Fitz reveal her true identity to Rudeus, I want to talk about where their relationship will go from here, right up until the end of the Mushoku Tensei series. Naturally, this will contain big spoilers, but I will be keeping them to only what I need to spoil to talk about Rudeus and Sylphie's futures together, and I'll try to make it so it's easy to follow, even if you don't know any other Mushoku Tensei spoilers yet. I'm not going to dwell too much on the very start of their relationship, as that is stuff we've seen at the end of Season 2 Cour 1 anyway, and instead I want to focus on what happens for them in the longer term, including their domestic situation, their children, and the future arcs where Sylphy and Rudeus team up the most. Before all of that though, please consider subscribing if you want more Mushoku Tensei content, as well as next season, content about Rising of the Shield Hero and the Eminence in Shadow. If you've been watching my recent videos, I do still have lingering symptoms of the Rona, so I'm sorry for my voice still sounding a bit ropey, but I'm doing my best. And if you can afford it and want to help in this kind of lousy time, there is a link to my coffee in the description, and I really need the love. Yeah. So, enough of that. Let's talk about someone with no shortage of love to give, at least when it comes to Rudeus, and that's our sweet half-elf Sylphy. Well, she's technically a quarter elf, but I think that in fantasy stuff it's kind of the norm to refer to anyone with a decent sized bit of elf in them as a half-elf, so I'm just going to go with that. After revealing her true identity to Rudeus, they start up a relationship. This results in Rudeus finally overcoming his ED, which does fulfill what Hitagami told him. Hitagami had said that by going to the university and investigating the mass teleportation incident, he would solve that problem. It was, of course, looking into this topic in the library that allowed him to start a friendship with Fitz after they first met at Rudeus's entrance test. So, while it was in a roundabout way, this, to Rudy's mind, is another case of Hitagami's advice actually working out for him. As we of course know, Rudeus keeps Roxy's pantsu as a holy relic of his own personal religion, but Sylphy becomes the second goddess, and the holy relic he keeps for her is the bloodstained part of the sheet where they first consummated their relationship, Sylphy having been a virgin at the time. Now Rudeus refers to Sylphy as his goddess of love, where Roxy is the goddess of wisdom, and later Eris will be his goddess of war. Now, Rudeus wants to marry Sylphy, but this means he'll need a home for them to live in, as they're both currently living on the university campus, and that's not really proper for a newlywed couple. He manages to get a very good deal on a mansion in Ranoa, close to the campus, because it's believed to be haunted. Before buying it, he spends the night there with Cliff and Zenoba, and they get to the bottom of the haunting. It's actually an autonomous doll, created by the previous owner, the Mad Dragon King Chaos. I won't go into who that is here, as he doesn't really play any role in Mushoku Tensei, but if you've read the prequel novel Old Dragon's Tale, you'll know who he is. And if you haven't, then I do have a full series reading it out on my channel if you would like to check that out. It's a really good story that gives a lot of lore for the Mushoku Tensei world. As you would expect, Zenoba is fascinated by the automated doll, and once they've incapacitated it, he takes it to his quarters at the university to study it, and probably to hump it and such like as well. Studying the intricate magic circles in the doll actually helps with a lot of the breakthroughs that he, Cliff and Nanahoshi have in their various projects over the course of the whole series. But since we're talking about Rudeus and Sylphy here, what's important is that this means the house isn't haunted, and so Rudeus acquires a big beautiful mansion, which at first is going to be home just to himself and his new bride. This will now be Rudy's home for the rest of his life, and as you'll see, it's a good thing there are a lot of rooms, given the size his household grows to. Now, weddings in Mushoku Tensei's world vary depending on the religion and background of the people involved, but since Rudy and Sylphy don't follow any particular traditions, they don't have a ceremony, and simply announce their marriage with a party at their new house, with their friends from the university in attendance. This is contrasted by the formal church wedding between Alina Lise and Cliff, where Cliff is part of the Millis Church, and their traditions are fairly comparable to the Catholic Church in our world. This does mean we will get to see Alina Lise in a wedding dress, but sadly not Sylphiette. Now, Rudeus and Sylphy's household expands almost as soon as they move in, when Paul sends Norn and Aisha to stay with Rudy, while he, Lilia, Roxy, Talhand, and the rest of his party from Millis go to rescue Zenith. He sends Regerd with them as an escort to keep them safe, but he only stays briefly. Regerd seems somewhat upset to see that Rudeus is married to Sylphy, as he'd been shipping him with Eris. And it's Regerd that first suggests to Rudeus that perhaps Eris had different reasons for leaving and didn't actually abandon him. Even so, at this time, Rudeus is intending to remain faithful to Sylphy and for her to be his only wife. Aisha remains with them in the house, choosing to work there as a maid, as she was trained to by her mother Lilia. But Norn, who dislikes Rudeus after the incident between him and Paul in Millis, decides to live at the university instead, though Rudeus insists she visits the family for a meal every few days. Even after they make up, she does remain living at the campus. So Sylphy and Rudy have a big house, a live-in maid who's something of a genius, and life is good. Sylphy keeps her job as Ariel's guard, and so does still stay at the university on some nights of the week. But other than that, they have a fairly peaceful time for a while there. Sylphy even becomes pregnant with Rudeus' first child, which he is delighted about. But this is Mushoku Tensei, so of course we're about to be hit with a turning point. In this case, turning point 3. Rudeus receives a letter from Gisu, who asks if he can come and assist in the campaign to rescue Zenith, because it hasn't been going well. Rudeus is in two minds about whether he should go, because the Begarit continent where he would need to go is a long trip, and he doesn't want to miss the birth of his baby. Everyone has different opinions on whether or not he should go. For instance, Norm wants him to go and help save their mother, but Hitagami advises Rudeus that if he goes, he will regret it, and that he should not only stay, but also, for some reason, get into a relationship with either Linia or Pasena. What sways Rudeus in the end, though, is that Nanahoshi offers him a way to get to the Begarit continent and back faster, using secret teleportation sites she learned about while travelling with Orsted. She's very reluctant to share these secrets, but it's important to her to have Rudeus back as soon as possible too, because she needs his mana for her ongoing experiments into magic circles that could potentially help her travel back to the old world. Elena Lise agrees to go with him, and they make the trip. And this is the first time Rudeus has gone against Hitagami's advice. I won't go too deep into what happens in this arc, as it doesn't really concern Sylphy much, but if you're curious, then it's all explained in my video about what happens to Zenith. The points that are important to the story of Rudy and Sylphy, though, are that Paul is killed during the rescue, and Zenith is brought back alive, but seemingly in a dreamlike state. She's unresponsive and like a shell of a person. Rudy is distraught about this, and on advice from Elena Lise, Roxy, who Rudeus also rescued in the labyrinth and who is now in love with him, offers him comfort in the form of spending the night with him. Rudeus had not intended to take a second wife, but he wants to do the right thing by Roxy, who of course he's always revered, and so he resolves to bring her into the family, though he's not sure how Sylphy will react and really doesn't want to hurt her. With Paul dead, he also arranges to take in Lilia and Zenith, with Lilia to become a second maid and help take care of Zenith in her invalid state. So the household is already getting bigger by 3 new people, and Rudy and Sylphy's daughter Lucy is also born, bringing another member into the clan. But what is most interesting here in terms of Sylphy and Rudy's relationship is Sylphy's reaction to Rudeus bringing Roxy into the family. While he had promised Sylphy he would be faithful to her, she had always felt that he would want other wives, and that she would do her best to welcome them and create a harmonious home for the whole family. She's grateful that she had Rudy to herself for a while, but did not ever really expect to be his only wife long term. She's very kind to Roxy, and later also to Eris, when Rudeus takes her as his third wife, after she returns from her training at the Sword Sanctum to help him in his second fight against Orsted. Rudeus loses this fight, and that causes him to start working for Orsted, kicking off the next phase of the story in terms of key Sylphy-related plotlines. Interestingly, while Sylphy is welcoming to the other 2 wives, and they end up raising all of their children together as a kind of team of mamas, as well as having a rotation in terms of who gets Rudeus on which nights, there is one person she's jealous about and doesn't want Rudeus to form any kind of romantic relationship with, and that's Nana Hoshi. Rudeus isn't attracted to Nana Hoshi at all, or she to him, but she's the only female character in his life who Sylphy would not accept. I'm planning to make a video going into the reasons for this soon, but it's an interesting aspect to her character, given she's not insecure at all about Rudeus's feelings for Roxy and Eris. Anyway, a lot of things happen for the family as a whole, as you'd expect in a story like this, but for most arcs, Rudeus won't have all of his wives with him, where he travels a lot in his role of helping Orsted, and usually only brings the people most suited to or personally involved in what he's currently doing. This means that for a lot of the major arcs, Sylphy will be at home with the children, her own daughter Lucy and son Sieghart, who I'll come to soon, Roxy's daughters Lara and Lily, and Eris's son Ars and daughter Christina. I do have a video talking about all of the children and what we know about them from Mushoku Tensei and the redundancy side stories if you want to know more about them. Still, each wife does have some arcs where she's in the main party, and for Sylphy, the most prominent one is when Rudeus is tasked by Orsted with helping Ariel become Queen of Azura. This was, of course, already Ariel's goal, and Sylphy does remain best friends with Ariel and Luke, and committed to helping them for the whole story. So when Rudeus learns from Orsted that it is helpful to the future he wants to create if Ariel becomes queen, it's kind of a no-brainer that he and Sylphy will assist with that. I'm going to explain what happens in that arc in full in my character video about Ariel, which is coming soon, but there's a lot of danger involved for the whole team, as you'd expect, where there is essentially a war for succession going on. The preparations for this campaign are also something that was expanded on a lot in the light novel version of Mushoku Tensei compared to the web novel, and when I read this, it was about the point where I ran out of English translations and had to switch to the web novel, so there are some things I need to catch up on now that the light novels are available in English before I go into them in a video. But what's most shocking for Sylphy and Rudeus during this arc is that it transpires that Luke has been being manipulated by Hitagami. Luke even ends up taking Ariel hostage and holding a knife to her throat. This situation is resolved without any lasting damage to the relationships between Ariel, Luke and Sylphy, and Ariel does indeed become the queen. But where these were the people closest to Sylphy outside of her family with Rudeus, it's a very stressful and dramatic situation for her. I actually think that the way the author retains Sylphy's personal relationships outside of Rudeus is really good. While she doesn't always have a major role to play in storylines, due to some characters needing to be at home with the kids or being pregnant at times, Sylphy doesn't become a less rounded person when she marries Rudeus. She still has her close friendships that she made before she reunited with him, and while sometimes helping them is also in Rudeus's sphere of interest, it is Sylphy that Ariel and Luke are closest to. In fact, Luke and Rudeus don't ever really become close at all, despite being cousins, and Luke being such a close friend to Sylphy. Often in harem situations in stories, the female characters don't seem to have much of a life outside of the main character, at least once they join the harem. But here, even when Sylphy isn't prominent in the key drama of an arc, she still has things to do and her own interests and relationships, outside of just being a wife and mother. This is also true of Eris later on, in terms of people she met at the Sword Sanctum. With Roxy, while she didn't really form any close relationships with people outside of Rudy's circle during their time apart, because she was mostly with Elena Lise, Tao Hand, and then Paul and other people Rudy also knows, she starts working as a professor at the university after they've been married for a while, so she has a job and plenty of interactions of her own outside of the family too. The way they're written to have their own lives going on alongside Rudeus really helps make the family feel alive and real, rather than like characters like Sylphy are just kind of in stasis at home whenever the arc Rudeus is involved in doesn't include them. Still, the final plot point I want to talk about with Sylphy is the birth of her second child, Sieghart. He is Rudeus's fourth child, where the wives seem to manage to get pregnant twice each, in the same order they married Rudeus in. This seems a bit convenient, given Sylphy should technically have a lot more trouble getting pregnant than Roxy or Eris, due to her elf blood. Elves have a very long lifespan and therefore are not as fertile as humans, so female elves don't end up having like 500 babies each in their lifetimes and quickly overrunning the planet. But Rudy is just that potent now he's got his equipment working, I guess. Now, at this point, we know that the reason Sylphy had green hair as a child, which she was bullied for, is that she has something called the Laplace factor. This is something that's part of the mechanism the demon god Laplace will use to reincarnate. It's fully explained in my video about Laplace, but essentially it's something that's put out into the general population, and eventually one of the people born with it will be the resurrection of the demon god Laplace. Anybody else who has it is normal, but will share some traits that Laplace had. In Sylphy's case, she has his green hair. Rudeus also has the Laplace factor, and this caused him to have his exceptionally large mana capacity and to be unable to use Tuki, or Battle Aura, the skill Baddie Gaddy talked to him about. The resurrection of Laplace is important to Orsted, as he needs to get something called one of the treasures of the dragon god from him in order to reach and fight Hitagami in his void world. The explanation of all of this is in Old Dragon's Tale, but again, it's explained in better detail in my video about Laplace. Perugius, the armoured dragon king, who has a friendly relationship with most of Rudeus's faction, is also concerned with finding Laplace when he reincarnates. This is because he's vowed to kill him as retribution for events that happened in the Demon-Human War. Again, there's more about this in my video about Perugius, so I'm being brief here so we can get on to how this affects Sylphy. It is known that Laplace will reincarnate into a male body, so females with the Laplace factor, like Sylphy, are of no particular interest to those who want to kill Laplace. But when she's pregnant with her second child, Sylphy begins to have nightmares that she gives birth to a boy with green hair. She and Rudy believe that a boy with green hair could be Laplace, and of course, with them both having the Laplace factor, it's not that unlikely that a son like that could be born. Their first child, Lucy, was a girl with Rudy's brown hair, but Sylphy becomes increasingly anxious about whether her new baby will be threatened by Perugius. Rudy is resolute that he will protect his son, even if Perugius wants to kill him, though Perugius is not someone he can easily defeat. But then, when the baby's born, and he is indeed a boy with green hair, it seems like their worst fears are confirmed, when Aramanthe, one of Perugius's familiars who can travel at the speed of light, he's the guy Ghislaine fought before the mass teleportation incident, appears in the room and demands they bring the child to see Perugius. Perugius lives in a sky fortress called Chaosbreaker, which again, you can find out the origins of in Old Dragon's Tale. They have at this point been here many times before, and cooperated with Perugius on things, but in this instance, Rudy and Sylphy are terrified. They know how serious he is about wanting to kill Laplace, thinking of it basically as his life's mission, and they're afraid that their newborn son may bear the brunt of that hatred. But when they get to Perugius, he clarifies that there is no way the baby could be Laplace, as he isn't due to reincarnate for several more decades. The reason he wanted to see the new baby was that he wanted to name him. This is actually interesting, because in Old Dragon's Tale, it was actually Laplace who named Perugius when he was born. Well, Perugius technically hatched out of an egg, as Dragon Racer want to do, but still his mother asked Laplace to name him, something Perugius probably doesn't know. Still, Rudy and Sylphy had already picked the name Sieghart, and Rudy is not a fan of the name Perugius chose, which is Saladin, either. Out of respect and politeness, and just relieved they aren't going to have to fight for their baby's life, Sylphy and Rudy agree to use Saladin as his middle name, so Sieghart Saladin Greyrat is the only one of Rudy's family who has a middle name. Sieghart is actually the one of Rudeus's children we know the most about, because there's a whole novel-length side story about him called Jobless Oblige, which covers him during college and his years after that. It takes place mostly during the same time period as the Redundancy side stories, but while those give a short story or two about most of the children, Jobless Oblige is a full light novel-length story that tells us a lot about him, and even includes a flash forward to him in middle age, which raises some interesting theories about things that might happen in the upcoming Mushoku Tensei sequel series. I do actually have a series reading out Jobless Oblige as well as Old Dragon's Tale if you're interested in that too, though it is missing the last couple of chapters at the moment. It does reach the end of the main plotline though, so if you want to listen to it, it won't leave you on a cliffhanger. It's just missing the wrap-up and flash-forward parts. While I like doing those kind of readings, they really kill me in the algorithm, where nobody is going to click on like part 12 of a series they're not following, so YouTube assumes it's a video your audience isn't interested in, and your channel takes a bit of a hit. I do plan to do the last chapters in one video, but I need to wait until my views pick up a bit after the patchy upload schedule I've had due to various problems in the last year, before I can take a hit to the algo. In any case, the main plot is all up there, so check it out if you want to know more about what eventually happens to Sylphy and Rudy's son. And now I guess it's time to talk about what happens in later life. Mushoku Tensei mostly covers Rudy's life up to his mid-20s, which is when the decisive battle of the series happens. However, it does then show us parts of his life at later times. One where he reaches 34, the same age he was when he died in the old world, and then again in old age, before finally his death. The Redundancy and Jobless Oblige side stories give us tales of different things that happen in between the big battle and his death, so we do know a lot more about what life is like for him and his family during parts of his later life. But essentially, things are mostly happy and devoid of serious threats, and he's mainly just working for Orsted, teaching his kids, and living a nice fulfilling life. Things remain harmonious with his wives. In fact, the final chapter of Redundancy, which is called The Last One to Leave the Nest, does actually result in them all sharing a bed together for the first time. It's actually not graphic or anything, and there have been times in the story where he's persuaded two of them to be with him at once, but you know how Rudy is. And it's pretty funny that this final chapter, which is mostly about his youngest child graduating and another child, Lara, leaving home, ends up with Rudeus achieving what we can only assume has been a goal of his for like 25 years. Still, the final chapters of Mushoku Tensei take place after Redundancy, and we do see Rudeus pass away peacefully from old age, surrounded by his family and satisfied with what he's done with his second life, and ready to leave the fight to come against Hitagami to Orsted and the others he's leaving behind. Eris at this point has also already died of old age, her being a human and a little older than Rudeus. She dies in a very Eris-like fashion, by training too hard. Roxy, who is of the Migurd race, who look about 14 until they're 150, still looks the same. Sylphy is 74 now, the same age as Rudeus. She has a longer lifespan than a human and ages more slowly, but because she's only a quarter elf, this is nowhere close to the lifespan of a full elf like Elena Lise, so she's said to look about 40 when Mushoku Tensei ends. Will Sylphy appear in the sequel then? Well, it seems likely to me that she will. In terms of lifespan, both she and Roxy should still be around at the point in time I would expect the sequel to begin. And I'm going to be vague about when that is because it includes extreme spoilers about basically all of the biggest mysteries in the series, but it is explained in my video about the mass teleportation incident if you do want to know. Also, in that final Redundancy chapter, the last one to leave the nest, the child who leaves home at the end is Roxy's oldest daughter, Lara. Now, Lara is the companion of the sacred beast. Basically, she's the hero the beast tribe have been waiting for, and she gets to go around with that giant puppy. She's almost certainly going to be important in the sequel, and when she leaves, she tells them she's going in search of a man. Rudy asks if they'll get to meet him, and Lara essentially says that Rudeus won't, but Sylphy and Roxy probably will. Lara is telepathic and proficient in divination, and she's a very odd girl, but we can take this to mean she's expecting whatever it is she's foreseen that she has to get involved with to be something that will happen too late for Rudeus and Eris, the humans in the family, but not for the demon race and half-elf mamas. So there is definitely potential for Sylphy to fill some kind of role in the sequel. And finally, I just want to talk about what happens to Sylphy in a world without Rudeus. As you may or may not know, depending on how many spoilers you've seen, Orsted is repeating a 200-year loop, which he'll continue to repeat until he finally defeats Hitagami. His father, the OG dragon god, put him into this loop, and that's yet another thing explained in Old Dragon's Tale. But the loop Rudeus and later Nanahoshi appear in is unique. Orsted has seen countless versions of this time period, but there's never been a Rudeus, a Nanahoshi, or a mass teleportation incident before. Now, some people in the Mushoku Tensei world have what is called strong fate, which means that in more or less every loop, they're still fated to be born and to have certain traits and certain things happen to them. Sylphy is one of these people, and so Orsted has observed her in many other loops. In loops where Rudeus doesn't exist, Sylphy ends up being tutored by Roxy instead, and she ends up being a successful adventurer using her mage skills. But interestingly, Sylphy never marries or finds love in these other loops, and neither does Roxy, with both remaining single and not having children. Eris actually marries Luke in every other loop, but that's another story. It's strange but sweet that it seems like the only man for Sylphiette is a person who shouldn't even exist in this world, and I hope you're happy to hear that the relationship they began in the Academy arc is going to stand the test of time. But what do you guys think? Is Sylphy your favourite of Rudy's wives? Did you cry like a little bitch at her reveal like I did? Let me know in the comments. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon and those of you who've helped me out with donations via Ko-fi. I'm really grateful and I love you all. Thank you too for everyone who helps me out by subscribing to my channel and watching my videos. Thanks for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.